Hi there, I hope you're all well. So today I'm going to be covering the UK House Price Index for Scotland, January 2025. I'm going to go over the economic statement. I'm going to look at some of the headline stats, what the average property is that's selling at the moment, what the transactions are in Scotland, and it'll give us a really good idea of the health of the property market in Scotland across Fife, Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh. I'm going to cover all that with you today, and I will give you some good insights into what is actually happening at the moment and how strong the market is just now. So the economic statement has just been released today, and what they're looking at is total transactions. So they're looking at the volumes that are registered with the Land Registry, and there's multiple things that they take into account in the health of the property market. That can be the average price that property is selling at. It can be the number of transactions, which is the main and the key one, but it's also actually affected by inflation. It's affected by base rates, and it's talking about what that looks like and how that might or might not impact yourself. So at the moment, Bank of England base rates are currently sitting at 4.5%. So what influences those? It basically influences what we're going to spend and how we're going to spend it. And the more that the interest rates rise, the more inflation will come down. So we're going to be looking at interest rates and also inflation. The interest rates at the moment, as I say, are currently sitting at 4.5%. The next review date by the Bank of England is scheduled for the 8th of May. So certainly something for you to watch out for, get an idea of how that impacts yourself. And what we're looking at is the impacts that inflation has on that as well. So current inflation rates at the moment are sitting at 2.8%. So that has actually come down from January, which was 3%. So February is sitting at 2.8%. What impacts inflation? The things that impact it are basically recent trends. So we're looking at historical cost of living crisis. We're looking at how the sector's performing. We're looking at what is impacting in regards to what are people spending money on and how frequently are they spending it and how those impact it. So interest rates really influence that. And if inflation comes down, then interest rates hopefully stay at a good rate. Interest rates influence how much people spend, as we know, and that changes how shops and other businesses set their prices. Higher interest rates means that higher payments on your mortgages, of course, and also loans that you may have, meaning people must spend more than really they want to on those things and less on other things, which is why it impacts inflation. So inflation, we're talking about travel, we're talking about food, we're talking about heating, we're talking about buying new cars. All of those things are impacted by it. So it means savers also get more return and potential borrowers find it more expensive to take out loans because interest rates are going up. You're going to have to pay more monthly payments. These things make it less attractive for consumers and businesses to spend money. And that's how it impacts inflation. So just something for you to think about there. But as I say, the next review for the interest rates is the 8th of May. So something to look out for. But we're going to just have a little look at the highlights on the economic statements. So average house prices in Scotland increased by 4.6% in the 12 months to January. So very, very positive. The average price at the moment is £187,000 across Scotland. So again, that's a provisional estimate because this is January. So it works in a 2-month delay because Land Registry, it takes a little bit longer for the numbers to come through. But again, positive that we're seeing those increases. So good average house price, isn't it? This was down though from 5.9 from December. But again, not a big impact as such. It's still really attractive to purchase in the Scottish area and across Fife. And I'm going to cover all of that as well when we look at the actual individual parts of the country and how people are spending. On a seasonally adjusted basis, average house prices in Scotland increased by 0.2% between December and January 25, compared with an increase of 1.5% in the same period 12 months previous. On a seasonally adjusted basis, so what do we mean by seasonally adjusted basis? That basically is where we've got the exact numbers just now in regards to what is forecast, and then they get the actual numbers and then they adjust that forecast. So that's why you see that little bit of adjustment there. Comparing the provisional house price volume estimates for November 23 with the provisional UK volume estimates for November 24, the volumes of transactions have increased by 19.2% in Scotland, and across the UK as a whole, it's increased by 31.7%. The transactions basically are money in the bank, keys exchanged. So it's nothing to do with what you actually achieve in a value for your property. It's about how many properties did actually change hands. And that's where the health of the market comes from. Looking at property types. So in Scotland, terrace houses had the highest annual percentage change out of all property types. That increased by 5.8% in the 12 months to January to £172,000. Flats and masonettes had the lowest annual percentage change, which increased by 2.9%, and that was in the 12 months from January 25, and the average price for those types of properties are £132,000. In Scotland, 28 out of 32 local authority areas showed an increase in average house price at January 2025 compared to January 2024. So a really healthy position to see that all over the UK and all over Scotland, we're seeing increased numbers. So that makes it really healthy for the market, doesn't it? So we're going to have a little look at some of the clear stats. So that was the highlights. Let me just share this with you. One wee second, I'll just get the slides. Sorry, I'm having a little technical problem there. I'm not getting my slides up today for some reason. So what I'm going to do, my share screen's not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have to read them to you. So the headlight stats, as I said, were average prices of a property in Scotland at £187,000. So really positive, really affordable. What we tend to look at is 6 times income. So the average salary, say in Fife, for instance, is 32,000. So if you look at 6 times that, that's about 100, nearly just short of 200,000. So at 187, it's really affordable to live in this location. It makes it really attractive for people, doesn't it? The annual price change of a property in Scotland, as I said earlier, is 4.6%. So again, a good improvement on price volumes. Great to see that that's coming along in regards to improvement in the prices. Monthly price change for property in Scotland, 0.2%. So again, it's still an improvement, and that's what matters, as long as we keep seeing improvements. And the index figure for Scotland for January 23, we're at 100, we're at 107. So that's showing real good positive growth. So that's really great for us. What that means is that the market is strong, and actually that's through the winter months as well, when seasonally, generally that is the slower time. People don't want to move at Christmas. Some do, and we have sold houses in that time. But actually, in general, people are always have this mentality that they're going to wait for spring. So it'll be really interesting to see what the March and April numbers look like. But that's really good headline stats, isn't it? And the annual price change for Scotland over the last 5 years. So again, I wish I could show you this graph, but for some reason I'm having issues with my screen share. However, what we've seen here is in January 21, it was sitting at about 6%. It then rocketed up to 14% in the price changes. And then after the budgets in 22, which Liz Truss obviously made a big impact, that made a big difference. And then it came down to actually minuses. But we're now seeing it creep up through January, July 24, and now into January 25. So January 25, we're actually back up at 6%. So not quite as strong as the high days when we first came out of lockdown, but it's really a good trend that we're seeing, and it's a positive trend as well. So that makes it great for anyone who's currently sitting in this situation where they might be thinking of moving. So great to see that. We then look at what is the average price compared to a year ago in certain locations. So again, I wish I could show you this, so I apologise. The link is in this post. So when it actually goes up later on again onto our web pages, you can have a look yourself and dive into the numbers a bit more, but I'm just really giving you some headlines just now. So if we look at Aberdeen, for instance, the average price there this month, January 25, was 140,831. It's now sitting at 144,159. So that's actually come down if we look at previous, current, minus 2%. So a little bit difference in the city of Aberdeen, which actually wasn't like that last month when we did this update. So that's quite a surprise for me. We look at the city of Dundee. They're sitting at 134,664 in January 25 versus 134,832 in January of last year, minus 0.1. So very, very minimal. Doesn't make a big difference in regards to the averages. We then look at Edinburgh. 295,133 is the average house price versus January of 24 at 269,705. That's a whopping increase of 9.4%. And actually, there was articles on the news last week about this as well, when they actually said that Edinburgh City is one of the highest performing in regards to property prices, but actually they're seeing it completely creep up. So they've got a bit of a housing crisis there in regards to the demand for everyday person who can't afford a property like that. So that's definitely a challenge for them, but great increase if you're a homeowner in that area, 9.4%. It's fantastic, isn't it? We then look at, say, Clackmannanshire, for instance, 158,000 versus 155. So that's gone up by just about 2%. If we look at East Lothian, 291,000 versus 280. So just short of 4% increase there. East Renfrewshire, 287 versus 274. So that's a 5% increase. So some good increases we're still seeing here. So again, it does show the strength of the market, doesn't it? We then look at Fife, and that's currently where I'm sitting at the moment. So the average price in Fife is 167,000 January 25 versus 159,000 in January 24. So that's a 5.3% increase year on year. So that's a great increase. So we're definitely seeing that as well. I'm seeing that every day when I go out, that the property market is functioning really well. Properties are selling quickly, and it's showing in those numbers as well. I think people have got confidence now as well, and things have settled down a little bit with interest rates. So I think that makes a big difference to when people will decide to move or not. So it's good to see that stability is starting to build. It'll be interesting to see what happens now with Donald Trump and all the impacts that that's having, and the statements that we're hearing and seeing on the news just now, how that may affect our economic statement, and some of the welfare things that we're seeing on the news just now as well. So it'll be interesting to see how, or if at all, that will impact the property market. So again, Fife performing really well. If we go down and look at some of the other areas, for instance, Perth and Kinross, 224,000 versus 210 last year, an increase of 6.8. Renfrewshire, 156 versus 143. So that's just short of a 10% increase as well. So that's actually performing very similar to the city of Edinburgh, although the amounts are different, but the percentages are increasing. So great to see that. If we then look at the average price change per property type, because again, that's really important for you. The average price is great to understand, but actually, if you're sitting in a detached house versus a maisonette versus an apartment, you want to get a good feel for, well, where does that sit as far as I'm concerned with the property that I have. So if we look at property types, for instance, if we look at January 25, detached properties, the average one, price-wise, was 349,919 versus January of 24 at 331,000. So that's an increase of 5.7%. And that's not actually quite the best performing. There's one that pips that a little bit. Your semi-detached, £212,000, is your average price for a semi-detached property versus 201,000 a year ago. So that's an increase of 5.5%. So again, really strong performance. Your terrace property is the one that's doing the best. So your average terrace property is 171,000 versus 162,000 a year ago, and that's sitting at 5.8%. So real good improvements there if that's the type of property you have. But actually, affordability-wise, apartments and maisonettes, 131,000 is the average price versus 128. So they've still improved by 2.9%. So everything is improving in price. So it's across the whole structure of the types of properties. But again, it gives you a good insight as to your particular type and how much yours may have improved. But all in all, your average house price, as I said earlier, 187,434 January of 25 versus 179,000 in January of 24, which demonstrates that 4.16% that I mentioned earlier on. So great to see that all types of property are performing well. Transactions, I talked about that earlier. Definitely need to look at the transaction numbers. They are what shows the health of the market, as I said earlier on. It's not about the value of a property, although it's great for you to know that, and it is good that they are improving, because then your equity's there, you're not on a loss leader. But actually the transactions, and that is, as I said earlier, keys exchanged, money's in the bank, and these are the properties that have completely closed off in regards to sales. Generally, rule of thumb, it's about 82% of properties that go under offer in Scotland actually complete. So you're losing about 18% month on month. So it's good to monitor these transactions, get a real good feel for how the market is performing. So again, I'm going to cover some of the same areas that I spoke about before. So if we look at the city of Dundee, for instance, the transactions in January 25 were 214 versus January 24 at 199. So pretty similar. City of Edinburgh, no surprises, totally backs up what we spoke about earlier on. 1,083 transactions versus 844. So that's literally a quarter again since the previous year. That's a massive increase, and it's no surprise then we're seeing the actual growth of the property market in that area. So if transactions are there, the demand is there, then absolutely, eventually it will start to impact the actual value of those properties, and that's what we're seeing. If we look at the city of Glasgow, 986 transactions versus 926. So that's just short of 10%. If we look at then Fife, we spoke about that earlier on again as well, 615 transactions versus 549. So that's about 10% as well. So again, that's a strong year-on-year improvement. If we look at North Lanarkshire, 524 versus 477 transactions, again, a similar number, about that 10%. So we're seeing the growth in the value of the houses and we're seeing growth in the transactions. Those coupled together make it a really strong market. So Scotland is definitely performing well. The sales volumes, if we look at sales volumes, so that's across Scotland, what does that look like? So the last 5 years is really what we're going to cover. So November 2020, the sales volumes for Scotland were 12,445 transactions. In November 21, that went down to 9,617. November 22, 9,081. November 23, it went down to just under 8,000. 7,999. And that's kind of when we saw that slowdown. There were so many less properties on the market. At that stage, there was about 450 properties per month were on the market. Per week, sorry, we're on the market. What we're seeing now is that's this morning when I checked, it was just shy of 900. So we're seeing double come into market as well. So that's what we should then see from November 23 at 7,999 sales transactions. November 24, it jumped back up to 9,404. So we're actually almost back at the November 21 positioning, which is really positive, isn't it, considering what the market has been like. So great to see that that's improving. What is it people are buying if you're buying a resold properties? So again, it's good for us to look at the property status, because transactions involving new builds versus transactions on pre-sold, so a property someone's lived in and someone else is going to live in it, versus new builds. It's really interesting to see the differences in those. So your average new build price in November of 25 was 353,877. Sorry, November 24. That was a monthly change of 9.9%. New builds, it takes about 3 months for those to register, which is why we're just looking at the November number. We don't have any more up-to-date number than that. But the average new build price at November of 24 was 353,877. As I say, that's an annual change of 23.1%. That is huge. What we're hearing with the new builds is primarily it's all down to the way that they manufacture the properties in regards to their EPC ratings. So there's so much emphasis put on actually making them user-friendly properties. So have they got solar panels? Have they got pump heaters? And it's really making it expensive for builders, which is why we're seeing that difference in price. So if you're thinking of buying a new build property, you're going to be paying a substantial amount more than if you bought a resold property. Existing resold properties, November 24, the average price was 174,392. It's almost half the price of a new build property. That's a massive difference, isn't it? 353,000 versus 174. It just shows you that that is quite exceptional difference, isn't it? Annual changes on existing pre-sold properties as well is still increased as well by 3.5. So not quite the 4.6% we've seen across all of Scotland, but on average at November, 3.5. So we'd like to see, as that comes through when the transaction is complete, that we're sitting in that same position that we've seen in the average sales that are coming through. So really interesting to see that coming through. As I said, the Bank of England interest rates get reviewed again on the 8th of May. It'll be interesting to see if those freeze, reduce, increase. If they increase, that's not always good news, because as I said earlier, it makes a big difference in what we can then spend our cash on. So everyone is probably keeping their fingers crossed for a decrease so that it keeps the market going the way that it's going. As I said, really apologise that I couldn't show you the slides. Check on the link. You'll be able to go in there and study those articles yourself. The whole article will take you maybe 10 minutes to read, if that. If you have any questions, feel free to message me directly. Even if you're watching this on rerun, again, you can message us. We'll absolutely come back to you. Really appreciate your time. And it's Perrie at Fife Property TV. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.